So today we are covering another question about repurposing your podcast content. And the question is, what content repurposed to YouTube works well for a podcast? So let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Crystal here today, and like I said in the beginning, we are covering repurposing your podcast content. And the question comes from Carolyn, and she says, what content repurposed to YouTube works well for a podcast? Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not a YouTube expert. I don't have hundreds and thousands of subscribers, but I can tell you what has worked well for my podcast content. First, let's actually talk about what didn't work well. Because whenever I first started sharing my podcast on my YouTube channel, I thought, well, I could just create sound bites, or I could create a video using just a graphic for my podcast and putting the audio file behind it, uploading it to YouTube, and it'll go viral, right? I mean, these are the things that we think about. That did not happen. It did not happen even just a little bit. And if you can go back to my YouTube channel and see where I uploaded the original files for the Rookie Life podcast, this was my very first show, these didn't get a lot of views. And for good reason. People don't typically come to YouTube or other video platforms to listen to an audio-only file. I know for me, even as a consumer, I don't just turn on YouTube and then put it in my pocket and say, oh, I'm going to listen to this video. People typically go to video platforms to watch a video. So I'm not a big fan of putting a graphic up and then putting the audio in there with it and calling it a video for YouTube. These don't perform very well. This has been my experience. Now, what you can do, and what I am a really big fan of, is taking a piece of your podcast content and doing like really short clips about the takeaways that someone could expect listening to that episode. So it's not the same as a soundbite. It's more of me doing like a direct to camera, what I am right now, and telling you, you should go listen to this podcast episode because it's going to teach you how to repurpose podcast content, which this episode is right here. You should go check it out. It's all about the 5 keys to repurposing your podcast content. So go listen to that. But I could continue on and I could say, oh, here are the first 2 keys to creating really awesome podcast content. And then if you want the rest of them, go listen to the whole podcast episode. So you can tease out your podcast episodes on your video content, but you don't have to record yourself direct to camera, which is another thing I wanted to talk about. Because for me, and this is just my style of how I record my podcast, I will have notes in front of me when I'm recording. I'll have Asana pulled up on my computer. I'll have a journal in front of me that I've used to write down my notes, but I'm looking down when I'm recording my podcast, or I'm looking at my computer. I'm not typically ready to look directly into camera without looking away, looking at my notes, looking down, looking up, doing this the whole time. It's hard. Maybe if I had a teleprompter and a whole studio and a producer and all the things, it would be a lot easier. But it's typically just me in my office recording solo episodes. And so whenever I'm doing that, I like to just record the podcast. And then in the future, I say, man, that was a really good point. Maybe I could turn that into a YouTube video as well. But I'm not a big fan of recording my podcast and my video at the same time. It just doesn't work well for the way that I create my content. But I want to go back to the point of what I was just saying about when you are recording something that's not solo, but an interview. So I do a lot of my interviews on Squadcast. You can check out more information here and go to crystalproffitt.com/Squadcast for a free trial. But I use Squadcast, and this is a platform where I can record my podcast with audio and video. And so what I'll do is I'll record an interview, and whenever I'm done with my recording, of course, I'll strip that audio out and create a podcast episode. But instead of taking all of the video content and just putting it up as a 45-minute video on YouTube, I'll take short clips of it to tease out the content. So maybe I'll create a 5-minute clip where I'm highlighting something that my guest said, or a great part of our conversation, or something that I think, man, if they just knew that this is some of the stuff that we're covering, they'd really be excited to go listen to the episode. So I'll link to a few of these examples below, but I know I recently did an interview with Amy Porterfield, and I used clips of our interview to entice people to go listen to the entire episode. So these are just a few ways that you can use YouTube or video content in alliance with your podcast. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to decide, what is the priority piece of content? Is it going to be the video, or is it going to be the podcast? Because once you make that decision, you can better make decisions in the future based around which content you want to make the highest production. Do you want to look direct to camera the entire time and create awesome video content? That's fantastic. Then you can strip the audio from it and your podcast is secondary. Or if you're like me, my podcast is priority. So it is typically the longest form piece of content. And then from there, I can cut it up, chop it up into little pieces, and use bits and pieces of it to put on Instagram as sound bites or short clips, or use it for shorter YouTube videos like what I'm doing today. But I think that making that decision about what is the highest priority for your content will make everything else a lot easier. So thank you, Carolyn, for your question about repurposing podcast content. If you have questions, please post them in the comments below. I would love to answer them and create more videos like this where we are talking about specific types of repurposing your podcast content. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe below. That way you get notified every time we put out a brand new piece of content every single week. Check out these videos right here, all about podcasting and running your online business. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.